what should I look for in a candidate? And my number one thing is always, have they read the Constitution in the last 5 months? Even more importantly, have they read it in the last year? Because most of them haven't even read it. And so that's a number one question that we should be asking all of our candidates. Why? Because they take an oath to that document that they'll uphold it. And if they haven't read it and they don't know it, how do you uphold something you don't know anything about? So tonight, we're going to turn the time over to Quinn. He's going to go through questions. The thing that I like about Quinn is it's not just, okay, ask these questions and that's good. It's ask these questions, and if you get this answer or this answer, then you ask the next question that goes with that to find out where they're really coming from. Okay, so that being said, Quinn.
Thank you, Pat. To start off with, I like to do things a little bit more informally, so if anybody has a question, raise your hand and let's discuss it. I don't want to miss a question when you have it. I think questions are how we learn, and it's how candidates learn as well. Candidates need our questions so that they know what we're thinking. The first thing I want to talk about is, how do we form a baseline? What kind of questions can we ask that will give us a baseline of where our candidates are sitting, what they're thinking? That's really my opinion, that's the purpose of vetting a candidate, is to figure out where their baseline is. I know where mine is, but I don't know where theirs is. So some of the questions that we need to ask have to deal with, how do we determine their baseline? The first thing that we need to know before we start vetting candidates are, what are the requirements for the office that they're running for? Does anybody know where you can find those requirements?
Constitution.
The Constitution. There's a couple other places. Anybody else?
State website.
Pardon?
The state website. I don't know.
Cities, county, wherever
Yeah.
they're running.
We
should
have the federal
requirements.
Constitution. We also have a state constitution. Both of those have requirements that candidates have to meet. We also have one other thing, and it is the Utah Election Code. It's important to read those and understand what those offices' requirements are. Before we can ask any questions that are meaningful for that candidate that are specific to that office, we need to understand what their requirements are. Pat mentioned the oath of office. Does anybody know the oath of office? Can you recite the oath of office?
Part of it,
What can you?
to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's part of it.
There you go. That was timely.
And to full and faithfully execute the duties of the office I'm about to enter, so help me God. Something like that.
We actually have 2 oaths of office. I don't know if you knew that. We have one that is for the state and one is for the federal. Let me read both of them to you because they're both meaningful. This first one is the federal oath of office. It says, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. Do you know most of our elected officials, they go through that one time?
They don't have
And
the Constitution.
there are some important principles in this that they need to remember. So there's questions we can ask about the oath of office, if we know the oath of office. Let me read the state one. The state one says, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Utah, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. It's a little different. What are the most important things in those oaths of office that I read?
Constitution,
What about the Constitution?
following the Constitution, making sure that they're not going against anything in the Constitution. Or ignoring, yeah. And fidelity, I would say, is important too, because that means something to do with your honor. And anyways, the main thing we need in candidates are people that have honor, have ethics, have all these qualities that we need to be our leaders. And anyways, seems like they hit that in these oaths, and they need to make sure that when they say take those oaths, that they don't take them lightly, and they follow them to the letter.
I was talking, go
When I
ahead.
was in officer training school for the Air Force, we had to memorize that, which is why I still knew the last sentence of it. And I think part of the reason why is so that you understand what you're committing to. And so I think, to your point, they have to understand what they're agreeing to do if they're elected.
What, do the county people do the same oath? Do they have a different oath? Which one do they do?
State.
They do the state oath.
We also need people who are gonna actually do the duties of the office. We've got a president who ignores immigration law. We have DAs all over the country that are ignoring prosecutorial duties that they have.
Do you know who is the lowest in our government that still is required to take the oath of office? And I use that term loosely because lowest doesn't mean lowest as
President?
far as their worthiness, but I mean, what's the most basic office?
City
Administrative?
council?
City council.
Oh.
Do you know how many of our city council people have we asked if they know anything about the oath of office?
They don't.
Do you
They
think
don't.
that our city councils might vote a little differently if they understood the oath of office in the Constitution? Maybe, maybe not.
I don't think elections are on this.
One of the things I think you need to understand, I was really surprised at, they no longer really take an oath. Because a true oath is to a higher power. And almost every level of government has now taken out, so help me God, out of the oath. Which means they're really taking an oath to no one.
To nothing.
And if you go back to our founding fathers, they make that very plain, that that oath has to be taken to God.
Someone really.
Did you notice that difference between the federal oath and the state oath? They have taken that out in our state.
Oh my gosh.
It would be good to put it back in my opinion.
That's crazy.
Do we know when they took it out?
I don't,
I mean, was it ever there?
it was, I believe. But I didn't have time to research that,
Interesting.
so I was just getting ready to leave to go out of town when we decided to do this, and I thought I'd have some time while I was out of town, but where I was, I didn't have internet.
That's good. It's good to take breaks like that.
So, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine and asked him what his opinion, what he would say in this class if I gave him an opportunity. He lives up in Orem. And he said two things. He said, we need to be running the government as a government and not as the church. And I almost started laughing when he said that. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, his father, now this guy is 80, almost 80 years old. I think he's 78. And his dad was in the legislature for like 30 years. And his dad used to complain to him about how all of these people would come into the legislature and they would try to act like they were in a ward council or a church meeting, and they would try to run things like the church meeting. And it used to drive his dad totally crazy that they would do that. And so that was the first thing he said. And the second thing he said, it's on my list of things that I want to talk about right now. And I'm going to use this board. What are the most important things that we should be looking for in a candidate? Honesty. Integrity.
Knowledge.
Experience.
Pardon?
Experience.
How about behaviors? Observable behaviors, decisions they've made.
Empathy.
Empathy?
Cool hair.
Cool hair?
No, I guess not.
How about policy positions?
Courage to stand up for something, even if they're the only one.
Yeah.
Worldview.
Worldview, is that?
Commitment.
Voting record. Have they voted in elections since they've been living in DC? Not mentioning any names.
We got it.
Seriously though.
What else?
How about who they choose to do business with, who they choose to hitch their wagon to? You know, we all do business with.
So how would you say that? Relationships?
Yeah, I guess so.
Associations.
Associations? That's probably better.
Okay.
Source of funding?
Ooh, that's a really good one. Hello.
I don't know if we know that.
Utah Builders
but-
Association?
Maybe.
Anyone?
The lower I get to the ground, the worse I spell. And
That's
then
pretty low for you.
Funding.
donors. There's 2 M's in donors, not 1 M. Anything else that you would list?
Listening ability.
Okay.
Communication skills.
Moral character.
That kind of goes up there with honesty and integrity.
What else would you?
The reason for being there, purpose for being there.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
They're,
motivation.
Why are you doing this?
Motivation, I'm gonna call that motivation.
Is it service to self, service to others, or just, well, what is their purpose?
Yeah,
Popularity.
Their ability to work with others.
Okay, let's see.
Or to have influence.
Teamwork.
Yeah, there you go.
Teamwork, that's a good.
Accountability.
Spelling ability. Sorry.
Yeah, you wanna come and write this for me?
Yeah, right.
Way worse.
Is their family situation important?
Could be.
Personal history, personal, yeah.
So, personal, family?
Religious views, maybe?
How about intelligence instead of religious views?
I'll go with that.
Well, I kind of,
It's-
moral view, I
How
kind
about
of, you
wisdom?
know.
What about wisdom?
Yeah.
Wisdom is kind of like intelligence with that
But
underlying.
knowing how to use
Yeah,
intelligence.
yeah.
So wisdom?
Wisdom's,
Like
yeah,
that.
wisdom's much better than intelligence.
Yeah, I agree.
How about confidence? Is that
Another
something
good
that's
word.
important, do you think?
Yep.
Yep.
And wisdom, experience, and what they've done, and how they've done it.
Strong backbone.
A what?
A strong backbone, something that.
Kind
Is
of
that, would
encourage.
you
You
put
don't-
that under courage?
Thick,
Yeah.
thick
Yeah.
skin.
How about the biggest flyers? Sorry, teasing.
If you were to pick one of these as the most important, which one would you pick? And why?
I think accountability.
You would pick accountability.
And the why is to own up to decisions that you make.
Honesty, integrity.
That's what I'd choose.
I have two. I know we're supposed to pick one. Courage, because I think it's one of the more rare ones up there. And then voting record, because only for those that are obviously in office and have a voting record, but that is what literally shows us what we can expect. Because most people aren't gonna be dramatically different from what they did before, right? So those were the ones that I would pick up.
How many candidates that we see coming up have a voting record?
Well, a lot of them don't, and then it doesn't apply. But I'm saying if we're evaluating someone who has a voting record, that's a really good indicator of what we can expect in the
Yeah,
future.
you're right.
Yeah.
That is.
I'd say knowledge is pretty important, because if you don't know what the issues are and what, needs to be done.
Can I change the knowledge to
Okay.
knowledge of the Constitution?
That'll work.
There we go, yeah. Knowledge of what actually matters.
Knowledge of everything.
That's not construction. Constitution.
Close enough.
Omniscience.
I think, you know, that's definitely important and, you know, super important, but like, I think about like county recorder. County recorder, their job is simple, you know, record what happens with property. And so they need to have knowledge of that. So it is important to have knowledge of the job they're doing as well.
Let's put knowledge down again.
Knowledge is a good thing. However, I have read story after story after story about lawyers that go to law school only to learn how to circumvent the law.
Yeah.
So knowledge is important, but where do you stand on how you're going to use that knowledge? That's why even in the Bible it says knowledge is good, but wisdom is better, because,
Knowledge
know,
without integrity is.
even the demons have lots of knowledge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But what do they do with it?
That's so.
Become Democrats.
I'll throw another vote for voting record. I think you can learn a lot from that. And, you know, as your question was, you choose one, I try to think of something that would reveal some of the others. And when you look at somebody's voting record, that's gonna show you, were they courageous in their votes? Were
What happens
can't hide
when
from that.
they don't
did they
have
have
a voting
honesty?
record?
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
And policy.
then you can't choose it on somebody who doesn't have a voting record, but I mean, where there is a voting record, I think a voting record
Yeah.
is a thing that can summarize many of these others.
That makes it much easier to vet somebody, doesn't it?
Sure.
Yes.
Definitely.
Well, and where do they stand? Do they stand with the American people and the Constitution, or do they stand with the elites? And the people that are against the Constitution?
So now, for the rest of the time that we have, I want to go through and talk about questions to bring all this kind of information to light. And before we get into very many questions, let me ask this question. Can we really, truly get to know somebody just asking questions when we meet them for an hour?
No.
No,
Not a
because
chance.
they've been
You
in the
gotta
game long
research.
enough, and they know the answers
They
they're
know what to
expecting to
say.
hear.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's why you have to take them off the path and push to make sure that they give you full and complete answers, not just the standard stock answers that they have.
Yeah, that's just what I was gonna say, is that they know the answers to give. You can ask, they probably have all those questions already in their head, and they know the answer to give that will sound right. So you do have to delve more. You have to watch their behavior and watch, go to more than one event and listen to what they say in multiple situations.
And the terms that they often use can be taken in 2 or 3 or 4 different ways.
The what?
The terms that they
Oh,
use.
terms, okay.
I mean, you could have 100 people, it was like listening to Obama, and 100 people could have a different,
That's so true.
a different feeling of what he believed.
I also wanna know, like, they can tell you what they think and what they would do or whatever, but it can be very different when they're under pressure.
Yeah.
So how do we vet
So,
somebody
yeah,
and find that
exactly.
answers to those kinds of questions? That's really the purpose of why I try to vet people the way I do. Because I wanna know what they're gonna act like under pressure, I wanna know what they're gonna be. And so some of the questions that I try to ask are geared to try to bring out. So let's think about some of the questions that we might ask to bring out how they'll respond under pressure. Can you guys think of a good question to ask somebody? Ask a candidate?
If there was a bill coming up and there were 2 constitutional items in it that go against the Constitution, would you vote for that bill? And if not, why not? And if
I
they
can
say.
tell you exactly what you want to hear with that question.
Right.
Why?
Because I know that this person is gonna sit there and tell me, oh, well, either he's gonna be a person that's gonna say, well, I have to take a look at it for the greater good or what, and instead of just saying, if anything is against the Constitution in a bill, it's no, period. And that's the way it should be, because you cannot sit there and try and nitpick which constitutional item you want to follow. Okay, well, we can help people with this, but it's gonna hurt other people with this. So it has to be something where you're saying, you can't vote for anything that goes against the Constitution. And that's what you need to know.
But it's still just a supposition, it's just suppose this, so they're gonna say anything they want.
Right.
Well, that's where
I-
it's your
we-
responsibility.
We would need to come up with open-ended questions, no closed-ended questions, it's a yes or a no. Open-ended questions about something in their past that is a public record or church record or something that
Check it out.
they've come up against that, you know, do I go up against the Constitution? Do I go up against the Bible? Do I go up against whatever it may be? But an open-ended question where they have to have,
So maybe let's develop a question that we could ask, you know, right here, right now. Let's pretend I'm a candidate, I've been one before. So let's come up with a question to ask me, to see if I have a backbone, if I've stood in the past. Yeah.
well.
What's something that we
like-
could ask that would help answer that question from my past? Doesn't have to be religious, doesn't have to be political, doesn't have to be anything but from my past that shows that I've stood up in the past. So what kind of a question could we ask?
Can you give me an example where you stood up for the right thing even though everybody else did the wrong thing? And ask them for a specific example. And if they haven't had one, that's
That's a
really
big red
telling
flag,
right there.
that's a
Yeah.
big red flag.
Yeah.
You like
So,
everyone?
so that's a great way to determine if somebody has the ability to stand up. Because how many times do we see our politicians that we love and we think they're gonna stand and they don't?
Well, even something simple as a job. I had to stand up against the boss one time that wanted me to cheat on audits. And I eventually got fired. And I knew that would happen. But do you stand up for truth? Do you stand up for, you know, whatever value we want that person to have? And is willing to forego money or whatever?
So to me, this discussion we're having is probably one of the most critical when we're vetting a candidate. Because it doesn't matter how well they know the Constitution, it doesn't matter how well they know the policies, if everybody around them is putting peer pressure for them to vote a certain way, if they don't have that courage to be able to stand up, they're gonna go with the peer pressure. And how many times have we seen that happen?
Too many.
All the
That's why
time.
we're in the
Too
state
much.
that we are.
Almost every time.
That's why we've lost our country.
So, you know, those are questions that if we don't ask those questions, then they don't think about it. When I was a candidate, I was asked so many easy questions. I had hardly anybody that asked me a difficult question.
Well, yeah, but that's because you're so intelligent.
That's not true at all. Half the time I'm as dumb as a rock.
Well,
There's certain things. I'll tell you, one of the toughest questions I was asked was, can I name when I was running for Congress, I was asked if I could name 3 responsibilities I would have as a congressman from the Constitution. And so fortunately I knew. I could have rattled off more than 3, but I started in and I told him, and he said, you know, you're the only one that's ever answered 3. He said, everybody else that I've asked that question to, they've answered 1. And that was all they could answer. Part of that, I can tell, was with the way this guy approached. When he asked his question, he put you on the defensive. And so he was in your face and he was trying to get you flustered so that it was hard to think. That was the toughest question I had, and I still thought that wasn't a very tough question.
I think it's crucial that you, like you say, do that and see how they react. Because, like we were talking earlier, you know, you have to see how they're gonna react to being put on the spot. And if they don't handle it well in front of you, they're definitely not gonna handle it well in front of 435 or whatever.
Or
They're gonna-
89 if it's in
Yeah,
the state. or-
Exactly, and so.
Or 6 if it's city council.
You can't go in there thinking that, oh, I have to be this nice, easygoing guy or girl. You have to go in there and say, listen, I'm gonna ask you tough questions and I expect answers. And if you think I'm attacking you because of that, you're right, I am, because I wanna see how you handle it, because that's exactly what you're gonna run into when you get into office. So,
That means we have to have done our part and
Yeah.
found out every little nitpicky thing we can about a candidate, what they did, what they didn't do, what they may have said at other meetings or whatever, so that we can catch something that looks a little fishy or is not our way of thinking, and pose a question that he needs to get into details
Mhm.
about why.
So there's a question, and I recognize multiple people in this room who have heard me ask it of a candidate personally, but I like to ask about slightly more like up and coming or possibly slightly controversial positions, because in the conservative world, we have policy positions, right? Like if you ask anybody what their position is on abortion or the border or whatever, everyone says the same thing. And I'm glad that we're all on the same page about most of those things. But the question in particular that I asked of candidate Carolyn Phippen was what her position was on digital surveillance, meaning facial recognition and digital ID and central bank digital currency. Thankfully, we're starting to get a coherent position on that generally. Not that these are cosmic issues, like I think most people, if they think about it for 10 minutes, would know what the conservative position should be, but when you're on stage in a bunch of people, that helps me to see knowledge on something that's not already well versed for most people. It helps me to see knowledge of the Constitution in terms of what can you do about it, because part of the thing I'll ask is, how do you plan to address this if you're elected? Right now, for some positions, recorder, you're not gonna have something like this to worry about, but if you're running for Congress or even state legislature, do you, like, I would love it if the candidate says, in addition to talking about it for a few minutes to show me that they know what the problem is, I would address a law to make sure that facial recognition, or I would propose a law, put forward a law that facial recognition is always optional, for example, right? Like, I actually thought Carolyn kind of failed in not saying she would do anything about it, but that helps assess knowledge of the Constitution, because you're telling me that you know what you can do from the position that you want to be in. And then there was a couple other ones, let me see. Well, courage, are you willing to stand up for it? I guess probably policy positions, knowledge, and courage, and knowledge of the Constitution would be the main ones, but at least you're hitting more than one with one question, right? So I like that question in particular.
I have a couple of questions I like. One of them is, is there any one issue that you will not bend on? Because whether we like it or not, everybody's gonna bend on something. And so what is the one you won't bend on? And you know, and how are you gonna make sure you don't? Then the other one I always like to ask is, you're one of X number in whatever it is you're doing. Not like the county positions, they are their own person, you know, and I mean their own position, but like city council, legislatures, etc. You're one of this group. How are you gonna make a difference? What can you do? One of 435. What are you gonna do to make a difference?
And that goes with that teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's another critical question, because it's so easy to just stand up and say no all the time, and then you become known as the no guy or the no person, and they know that you're not gonna help anybody do anything.
You're not effective.
And you become totally ineffective. And not that we want candidates to say yes all the time, but we need to have candidates that are, and what I used to say when I was on the campaign trail is, I need to put on my education hat. because I need to educate everybody in whatever group I'm in. I need to educate them on why. Not just say no, but I need to, before I say no, I need to ask questions. Why would we want this bill when this and this and this can happen? And that is an educational process that most of our elected officials don't do because they're intimidated by the other group members.
I just, 2 years ago, got involved with caucus and getting, becoming a delegate and stuff. And what I've found is when you're a delegate, you better be up to speed on everything. And you need to be able to, I go to all the different meetings and I very seldom see delegates in them. I don't see them in the commissioner meetings. You see a few of them in council meetings. None of them go to the Water Conservancy District meeting. You have to take I took the same oath when I became a delegate as what they take. And I take that oath very seriously. And I said, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this 110%. I'm gonna go in and get myself educated and learn what I need to know so that I can ask the right questions and get the proper answers that we need so that we know what candidate is gonna do the best job for us. If we go in there and, like you say, ask these, softball questions and things like that because we don't know the issues ourselves, we're doing a disservice to the public and our constituents, especially as delegates, if we can't do what we were elected to do, is get the information and bring it back and share it with everybody. And anyways, knowledge to me is it. If you're gonna be a good vetter of candidates, you better have
Good question.
something in your head. You need to be up to speed on things. And if you don't wanna make that effort, you're not gonna do the job right.
And everybody has a little bit different point of view, and so your questions should reflect your point of view. And that's one of the things that I love about having a group, have a candidate, allow the group to ask questions, because then we get to hear different points of view so that we can hear the answers from those points of view, because we may ask a very similar question and two of us will get totally different answers because of the point of view and the way we've asked that question. And so, that's every one of these issues, it's important to be able to ask questions regarding each of these issues. But this is only part of it. This tells us about the person. It doesn't tell us about their standards or the way they might vote necessarily.
I was gonna add, I like what was mentioned earlier about asking a policy question, and I'll choose to use a policy question that introduces this conflict, right? So that way you can, A, find out how they behave under pressure, B, find out which things they prioritize. So maybe something that, like you take things that are conservative viewpoints about like, parental rights and, upholding the Constitution or small government. And you say something like, well, what's your view on boys playing in girls sports? Or what's your view on minors undergoing trans surgeries or reassignment surgeries? These are things that strike to the heart of, well, if you're a strong supporter of small government, you say, well, I'm gonna leave that alone because that's a small government. We're gonna leave it up to parental choice. Parental choice is my high measure. It's like, well, but then what about protecting kids? Right? So you can kind of push them on
Right.
these things and find out where is that line? Where are they holding? What's important, right? Is protecting the weakest of our communities important to them, right? Or some of these other principles lay higher.
So on that point, the Constitution was designed to protect the weakest of all of us. That's what the Constitution helps us do. It helps protect the weak. It helps protect and preserve their life, their liberty, and their pursuit of happiness. When we violate an individual in any of those areas, we're not following the Constitution. And how many people are ready to violate those for the greater good? So those are questions that can be asked. The first question that I like to ask a candidate is, when is the last time you read the Constitution? There's a couple of reasons why I like that. And, you know, the first time I asked that question was to a prominent person that ran for an office and won. And he told me, and I'll tell you his age, when he was running, he was 67 years old. He told me the last time he read the Constitution was in college. His voting record shows that that was the last time he's read it. And so for me, that's a really important question, because that tells me, do they really appreciate the Constitution?
What if they say yes, or like last year? Do you have a question you like to ask?
Oh, yeah.
That lets you know that if they're lying or not? You know?
Yeah, in fact, I had two city council people in my city that they said, oh, I read it 2 months ago. And they know very, very little about the Constitution. So,
Reading it doesn't mean anything necessarily.
so my next question is there a specific principle, have you studied the Constitution, that you like? I'm not going to give them an answer.
Yeah.
And some of them, when I've asked that question, I've had some people go, I like the Second Amendment. Well, that tells me they listen to the news. Or, you know, they might say they like the First Amendment, but they don't understand the principles. And so, you know, I might ask a follow-up question. You know, what are the principles in the preamble that you like? That usually gets them, because people don't know the preamble.
What's your favorite line in the Declaration of Independence?
Yeah, those are good questions to ask. So it's not that we're trying to trip them up. We're trying to ascertain how much knowledge they actually have of the Constitution, because if they don't know anything about the Constitution, they're going to vote like that. And they're not going to have a pillar or a foundation to base any decisions on. Which means that if they're sitting in a vote and they have some guy come in that's a silver-tongued devil, they're likely to vote with him.
I was just dealing with that today. I spent all day texting and calling texting or emailing every senator about this bill that's just coming up, SB 240. And here's a response that I got from one of the guys. It's like, a lot of the work on the Constitution was done behind closed doors. And so then I said, so in other words, you plan to vote yes. And then I asked him, have you read the book Founder's Speech to a Nation in Crisis? And I strongly suggest it, but he's not. Oh, this is the answer that I started, because I said to him, I said, please vote no on SB 240. You were elected to be a public servant to we the people. Your calendar should be public information and should be totally transparent to those that elected you. Thank you for your time, and then my name. And he responds, I know well what I was elected for, and the first thing you learn is you cannot serve by everyone. And then I just said back, I said, you swore to take an oath to the Constitution, and that is all that matters. And then, of course, he just basically is telling me that he's gonna vote yes on it because he shouldn't be that transparent. And that's a Republican. I I wrote to even the Democrats about this. I think, what about,
Which one is SB 240?
it's about, the calendars of our legislators being private.
Being made private.
But what about, I've asked him too, do you know what the John Birch Society is?
Are you asking me that, or is that a question?
No,
you would like to
I
ask?
asked them that too, and if they give me this deer in the headlights look, it's like, no, we're,
I think something that, we tend to live in a society where we have to define every word. And one of the questions I like to ask them is, define for me what it means to defend the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What do those three things mean? Because you take an oath to defend that for me. What is it? So define those for me. And it's amazing how, I mean, life is easy, right? We're gonna protect anyone
Well,
from.
is it? How many people are willing to do abortion?
Yeah,
Isn't that an attack on life?
yeah. But it is amazing what they give you when you talk about happiness and liberty.
Here's another question that I like to ask. Where do the rights come from? You know, there's quite a few people that, I don't know why they believe that our rights come from the Constitution. Does there anybody think that in here? Where do our rights come from?
God.
There we go.
God. The Constitution protects our rights. Who does the Constitution protect our rights from?
Government.
The government.
The government. The Constitution is kind of a single-purpose, one-way document that protects society or the people from the government. We've forgotten that. Our courts have forgotten that. That brings up another question that I like to ask, and it usually stumps every one of them. And that is, do you know what a legal fiction agency is?
say that again?
Do you know what a legal fiction agency is?
Legal fiction agency?
Huh?
I know how to answer that one.
You know how?
Yeah, I say nope.
Most people don't know what a legal fiction agency is. It stumps most of our politicians. A legal fiction is something that has no legal authority, but it acts as if it does.
The
The
IRS,
administrative state?
BLM.
Yeah, it's,
3 letters.
we have a lot of legal fiction agencies that do not have the rights that they've taken.
I just realized, I think that's in one of the Tuttle books. Do you know what I'm
Tuttle
talking about?
Twins?
Tuttle Twins?
Tuttle Twins?
I think I remember that specific term. Do you know?
I have never read it in there.
I haven't read them all, but I can't remember. I know that we've got about 460 unconstitutional administrative
Yes.
agencies that Congress has allowed.
The Board of Education.
Yes.
So we have, in the Constitution, and it's 10, Amendment 10, or Section 10, I mean, of the Constitution, states that all rights not specifically given to the federal government belong to the states and the people. Not just the states, but the states and the people. And in our Utah State Constitution, any right that is not given to the state by our Constitution resides with the people. We've forgotten that. All of our leaders seem to forget that too. Those are good questions that we can ask.
Is there a different word we can use besides leaders? I really dislike.
Elected
calling them
officials.
leaders.
Public
We
service.
gotta change that.
They are leading and we're letting them, that's the problem.
Yeah.
They
Right
suck
down
at
the.
it. Yeah, you're right.
Well,
You're
I
right.
got thrown off by that question because I never heard, I mean, the LDS community has the expression agency, free agency. I never heard that until I moved here. So that's what I was making the connection was, is I'm going, okay, what free agency do they, so that kind of threw me off.
Oh, legal fiction.
Yeah, legal fiction agency. I'm going,
You're like,
Isn't
what
it,
another
isn't it
version of
ironic
free
though that they call themselves agencies? Isn't it ironic when the true agency, God's agency, is completely the opposite? Isn't it interesting?
You know, another question that I like to ask is, you know, I like to put things in as simple a manner as I possibly can. I like to simplify. If you simplify the Constitution down to one word, what word would you use?
We.
God.
See how many answers we've got? You know, some of these guys have given some pretty interesting answers that are different than any of the answers that we've got here. I have an even different answer too, agency. To me, the Constitution, if I boil it down to one word, agency. We have our God-given agency, and the Constitution protects it. And agency is an interesting thing between agency and freedom or liberty. Freedom is, you know, if you're free to do whatever you want, you know, people want to have that freedom and then they do whatever they want, regardless of the consequence. Liberty has consequences, and agency has the morality that goes with it, so it's got moral consequences as well. That's why I like agency. As you vet candidates, it's a perfect way to help educate candidates too. Did you know that? How many of you tried to educate candidates through your vetting process?
I really like something you said earlier, though, when you said that you're not trying to trip them up. I think that we need to be sincere so that they don't just blow us off.
Right.
You know, so we do need to ask the good questions, but be sincere in wanting to know the answer, not that we're trying to make them look bad.
Right. And I would never put anybody down for a specific answer. I would take that opportunity to say, well, this is how I would answer that.
Like, I have a question I ask. I say, what laws and regulations are you planning to get rid of, and what are they? Because they're not educated to even think that way. We're lawmakers, and it's all about making laws. Well, we need to re-educate. So it's not that, you know, that I'm trying to say, oh, I caught you. It's, no,
Right.
I want them to start thinking about, I should be getting rid of about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of laws and regulations that are all off the chart, not constitutional. That should be their number one priority. Shouldn't be going, yes, there are issues that have to be dealt with, but it should be very few. And the rest should be how we're gonna get rid of all this.
So that brings another question that I like to ask, and that is, what in your mind will make you successful as a senator, or as a congressman, or as a city council person? What will make you successful? It's kind of an open-ended question, and their answers are always very interesting, because some, if I can make laws that will help benefit society. And I think, oh, we already have more laws than we need.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, but that's very telling to me that they're looking to go in and make laws, pass more laws.
And what are those laws? Are they laws that are gonna give us more freedom, or are they laws that are gonna take away freedom? I've been watching all the laws that have been getting passed and trying to, there's too many pages to read all of it, but I just read what the purpose of the bill is. And you know, there's some that I'm like, good, that gave me back some freedoms, but others that I'm like, that doesn't affect me, but it does affect this person and their freedom, and so, is that good or not?
Now, you know, and because of the lack of time, I do the same thing, and I hate doing that, for this reason. I was talking to Mike Lee about this subject one day, and I said, so, Mike, what do you do when a law comes up that's a 5,000-page bill, and you don't have time to read it? And
Say no.
he said, that's a real problem, because we're expected to pass these laws that we don't have time to read. And he said, let me give you a great example of one that he said, I'm not going to tell you which bill it was, but he used a fictitious name. He said, I'm just going to give you an example to show you what I deal with. And he said, let's say I had a bill, and the title of the bill was Save the Kittens. And he said, and I get into this bill and I start reading it, and on page 2,954, I read one paragraph, and it says, we want to save the kittens from having to endure a hard life by euthanizing them. And he said, that was the only thing in the whole bill about save the kittens. But when I come out opposed to it, oh, you must hate the kittens.
Yep.
And
That's the hard part about the federal, because their bills are
so over the top.
Inflation Reduction Act.
See, but here's what just floored me is how far off we can get. Because in reality, the Ten Commandments could pretty well cover almost everything. So why do we have judges? We should be dwelling a lot on judges and getting good judges, because they're the ones who says, okay, thou shalt not murder is a law, right? We shouldn't have 500,000 laws about murder. However, there's a difference between whether somebody accidentally kills someone or what. There's a lot of levels, right? That's why we have judges and juries, is to try to decipher the severity of the law of murder, right? Not 560,000 pages to get stuff we want that are under murder. Right, that's what we've done.
Yeah.
That's what we've
So,
done.
you know, in respect of that, one of the questions that I also like to ask is, how many pages do you think a bill should be?
That's correct.
One ought to be
No
enough
more
in
than
my
10.
mind.
Me too. One, the Constitution was written on 4 and it's lasted over 250 years. Why do we have to have a bill that is more than 4 pages?
To hide stuff in it. That's the
Well,
whole
and
point.
I'm with you, because I think, like I said, I've been watching the bills in the Utah House and Senate, and I'm like, if you're changing that much, that it takes more than a page, you're changing too much. Because most of the bills are not brand new, they're just changing bills that are already
Right.
there, you know, a law that's already there. And so I'm like, if you're, just change the 1 or 2 words you need to change, don't change
Or get rid of
tons of it, you know?
Yeah.
Or do each one as a separate bill, so that it's not so crazy to figure out what you're actually changing.
If we had enough brave congressmen that would just stand up and say, the next time you give me a 5,000 or a 2,000 page bill and I've got 20 minutes to read it, I'm gonna vote no. And I'm gonna talk to everybody that I know, and we're all gonna stand together and say no. It would change.
So how do we ask a question to find out if they're willing to talk to other people in their group, whatever it is, and help educate them on the way they should vote on specific things?
We probably have to come up with a question, not asking a supposition, what might you do, but what have you done in the past that you felt very strongly about, and how did you get people to, you know, stand with you against whatever it is?
One of the questions that I've asked in the past is, have you ever led a team?
Have you ever what?
Led a team. And most of them haven't. You know.
Now, when you say that, ask that question, are you saying in general or are you saying in politics?
No, in general.
In general, okay.
In general. You know, you might not know it, but I like to play basketball. And
Well, I can't imagine that.
How's the knees?
they're still okay, although in the senior games, I have one knee that got tweaked a little bit. It still hurts. But I love to play, especially when we have a team that works together. There is nothing funner than a team working together. And that concept, it applies in every part of life. Everything is more enjoyable when you're a team working together. In business, in sports, in your family, everything. In politics, I believe it's exactly the same. When you have a team that works together, it just makes it more enjoyable and you get a lot more done. And so I love that teamwork concept, and I like to talk about that when I'm vetting candidates. And, you know, for me to vet a candidate, guess how long I could take?
Oh, weeks.
I've been on the phone for 2 and 3 hours at a time with a candidate. You know, and I love these guys and these ladies that are willing to sacrifice their time and their efforts to serve. And, you know, I'm disappointed that most of them don't know enough about the Constitution. They don't understand teamwork. They don't understand all these principles that we need to employ to help make our country great. And our founding fathers, they had to work together. And they had some challenges. They were all very opinionated. We have the same kind of thing today. You know, people don't have the same opinions. You know, I'm sure that there's a lot of things in here that we could all disagree on. But the important concept is to find things that unify us. And that's another question that I like to ask is, what kind of things would you do to help unify those around you in your office? Because unity is, to me, it's a principle of heaven. To become as one. If you read the scriptures at all in the New Testament, or if you're LDS, in any of the LDS scriptures, it talks about becoming as one. And the kind of power there is in becoming as one. And that's something that I try to work with every candidate that I vet. And it doesn't matter if I disagree with them completely on a lot of issues. I like to find things that I can be unified with them on. Because when I do that, I have created a friend that I have a little bit of influence with. I may not have a lot of influence, but I have a little bit of influence. I ran against Neil Walter. I still have a little bit of influence with Neil. I'll call and we'll visit from time to time on certain things. And I have some influence. I don't have as much influence as I'd like. I'd like to be able to tell him what to do sometimes. But, you know, that's not going to happen. And I've got to be realistic that that's not going to happen. And so I want to maintain a little bit of influence. And so in doing that, as I vet these candidates, I try to do it as civilly and as friendly and as fun as I can so that I create a friend that I can then have a relationship and start developing a relationship, and then I can have more influence. And you know, there's been many times I've wanted to stand and yell at candidates because they're just dead wrong. But that doesn't do me any good. I have zero influence when I do that. And so that's one of the most important things I think in vetting a candidate is to develop a relationship, because it's that relationship that will give me an opportunity to have some influence.
Well, I agree 100%, and I've burned a few bridges, let me tell you. but I'm trying to reestablish that bridge with Joseph Ellison. And, you know, the whole mess with the billings and stuff like that, and I told him, I said, you know, I didn't vote for you, but you are my representative now. And I hope that you prove me wrong. And then, when I found out he had a high rating on, something, I don't remember what it was, I wrote him a letter and I said, hey, you proved me wrong and I'm so happy that you proved me wrong. And so when I saw him at the, Lincoln Day dinner, we were able to shake hands and talk and do all that stuff. But there are just some people I don't wanna have a bridge with because they just are so totally out to lunch that, but with Joseph, I was willing to.
I know, I see your point, I'm not saying I'd say it would be easy for me, but, I mean, they say keep your friends close and your enemies closer, and it's true. As I've thought about that so many times over the past couple of years, as I've been just downright livid at some people in political positions, but I started to realize slowly, gradually, that I was gonna get nowhere by expressing that anger, no matter how right I am.
I was just gonna thank you for that comment, cause I think that's really important. Burning bridges doesn't get us anywhere. We need to build bridges, and I think that we have to realize that no matter who gets elected, even if it's our favorite candidate who gets elected, we're not gonna agree 100% of the time. There's gonna be votes that they make that we are not gonna agree with, and we're gonna be upset about. And the only way that we're gonna be in agreement with a candidate always is if we run ourselves. So we might as well realize that.
If we're the candidate.
Yeah, if we're the candidate. Otherwise, we just have to realize that, you know, and the other thing is that, you know, I've had candidates who I have really loved that didn't win. And, but I've tried to keep, like you say, relationships with those who might win so that I do have some kind of influence. And when you have influence, it's so much better. You know, when they will take a call and listen to you and talk to you, it's so much better than when they won't.
Right.
And I think we have to also realize that we're not the only people voting. You know, we may not be the voice of our entire county or our entire state, or, you know, our voice is only a little voice of, you know, I think about like our governor, 3 million people in this state. I can guarantee you that 3 million people don't think the way I think, you know, or even the way Washington County thinks.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful to realize that they're not just only representing us.
Well, none of us in this room think alike.
Right.
If we did, we'd all be drones. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say that one of the best things that we could probably do, of course it takes time, but if you see one of our candidates that is leaning toward voting that you don't think is right, we need to take the time to email them and ask questions and have them defend their position and have a nice dialogue. And you never know, we might come up with something, an idea that they have never even thought of. And we could influence them to change their decision, and you know, who are we except that we do have a thinking head and, you know, just a nice friendly dialogue more often.
Well, and sometimes
Would be helpful.
it's just that one question that could cause a sudden rush of different thinking.
Well, can I share an example? This just happened to me during this session. There's a bill coming up. It hasn't come out of committee yet, and I think it's not going to come out of committee. But I was given the opportunity to go and speak about it. And they had only heard one way of thinking about it. And it had to do with conservation easements. And so in what you're saying, take it a step further and talk about how that bill will personally affect you, or how something, like in this, conservation easements have hurt my family really badly. And so when I went and gave that experience, they were like, oh, okay, we need to think more about this, because there's another side to this issue than just what Farm Bureau is saying. And so I think that when we speak to them, it needs to be not that rapid fire and you're doing this wrong, but here's how this affects me. And so can we talk about this before something happens? So I think that, yeah, we need to be involved in letting them know, telling our own personal stories, making them, if it's just rhetoric, they're, you know,
They'll tune it
they
out.
turn it off, yeah, but if they hear a personal story and that it's something that's hurting you, they'll listen.
I mean, I think we all think that, oh, it's just Nate, who is he gonna care?
Yeah,
But-
they do though.
But we might have an opinion or an idea that really turns the light on.
Yeah, and just let me say one last thing in closing. You know, too many times we get emotional about things. And really the law is not emotional. But guess what? All of our politicians are emotional.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
That's why we should
And-
have very few laws.
Yes.
They're,
That's why
they're,
what?
they're
We
pretty
should
sharp.
have very few
Why we
laws.
should have very few laws. So, because we're just all emotional people. We live in an emotional world. And so we need to be careful with our emotions, because sometimes our emotions can boil to the surface, especially if they're doing something we don't like. And those emotions can cause adverse reactions. So as we're vetting our candidates, we need to pay attention to the emotions, because sometimes you might have a candidate that has just been grilled hard. Or, like I had one candidate, he was actually caught in a bald-faced lie, and they caught him on it, and his face went white, and he turned away and wouldn't answer any more questions. And you know, it's just, there's certain things that happen. And you know, I think we're out of time now.
I was just gonna say on
They
the
just
emotional.
We've gotta get the chairs and everything out, and they close in 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
On the emotional thing, April, I posted a thing about Davy Crockett spending money that you don't have a right to.
Yeah,
And
that's a great
that
story.
gives you a good idea of how emotions can change, make judgments that they shouldn't be making.
Mhm.
Just as an afterthought, I have the petition for Phil Lyman, if anybody's willing to sign petition to get, Phil Lyman on the ballot.
So, well, thank you. I hope you guys learned something. I hope